Welcome in. It is the Monday Schmooze, Big Ten Today. Dave Revson and Howard Griffith. What a weekend it was. We had the appetizer on Thursday and Friday, and there were some excellent games there. And then the main course over the weekend, Saturday, and even an extra one thrown in for good measure that was fabulous, that kept us up and kept us on the edge of our seats last night. Really outstanding. I think one of the things that, for me, that stuck out for the weekend was the fact that we saw a lot of quarterbacks step up. I thought going into this particular weekend, there were a lot of question marks we had about quarterbacks at particular programs. Everyone stepped up. No interceptions this weekend, so I know everyone's happy. A couple here and there. But you're right. Yeah. There's some really good quarterback play. Some of the new faces really playing well. Yogi Roth with us as well. He got to see a pretty good quarterback in Dylan Gabriel on Saturday night. Got to call that game in Eugene. Yogi, I know this is kind of a rhetorical question with you, given the energy that you possess, but you ready to go for an hour here, run through this stuff?
I'll tell you what, brother. You said 12-0 Saturday. Out here in L.A., a 1-0 Sunday has set the bar pretty high. Check out the L.A. Times if you need any reminders, man. But, yeah, it was a great weekend. Good to be back. Good to be in the flow of things. And you're right, quarterback play, which has been a question mark, I think, after our training camp tour, met the moment, at least on the opening weekend.
Well, let's get to our big story, and it is the weekend that was. We look at the big board. All 18 results from the weekend. The conference one missed field goal from perfection, but still 17-1. Nothing to sneeze at. Won every game Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We've already talked quite a bit about the first 2 days, so for our purposes this show, we're going to focus on the 12 games from Saturday and the one big one Sunday. And let's start there, as Yogi was talking about, because the weekend finished with some drama. USC took on LSU, only Big Ten game involving two ranked teams, and the Trojans pull it out as they top the 13th-ranked Tigers in Vegas. Woody Marks tallying the game-winning score with 8 seconds to go. 13-yard touchdown run. The captain 8-play, 75-yard drive. 27-20, USC wins it. Yogi, there is so much in this game. And you guys were already talking about quarterback play. Miller Moss was incredible. The defense was so much better than it was a year ago. Wide receivers were incredible for USC. There's, again, a ton to get to. Where do you want to start? You got the floor on the Trojans.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that it was the biggest stage, as you referenced, with two ranked teams. And, yeah, 4 new teams coming into the Big Ten. And it felt like all summer long, a lot of people around the country didn't even want to give Lincoln Riley a shot to let his team go play and go compete in a game. They did. They competed against a team from the South who often gets the benefit of the doubt. SC often just seen as, hey, the air raid, Lincoln Riley's offense. Are they good defensively? We know what happened to them last year. And they answered the bell. And I said it last night on the Big Ten Network of, like, if you did a power rankings after 1 week, it'd be hard-pressed to not put USC at number 1. We saw inconsistencies. I thought Penn State was impressive, of course, but I got to go with them. And I would start, I love QB play, and Miller Moss was phenomenal. I got to go with the defense, though. I mean, you looked early on in the first quarter. I think they had 4 blitzes on the first drive, got beat a few times, and then Dantlin adjusted. What great defensive coordinators do. And they showed blitz, didn't bring pressure, showed up on 4th down, showed up in the red zone, made plays when they had to, against, I think, a really efficient and complimentary quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier. And you look at the run game, the run defense, that's everything for me. Last year, almost 200 yards a game they gave up. They finished with 118 yards rushing allowed defensively, and I think 39 were on one play. So that was huge, especially entering this league. Then the receiving core, man, we've been talking about it all training camp. I think they're one of the best in America. They showed up. Jacoby Lane, Zachariah Branch, Deuce, of course, Kyron Hudson, and the multiple plays that he made, and won a huge one on that final drive. So they showed out. And now we got to see them do it again and again. And like we've referenced, man, it's a foundational year. And they have built a pretty good foundation for 2024.
Yeah, you have to feel really good about them, the way they went out and played in all 3 phases of the game when you start thinking about USC, particularly on the defensive side. And you've talked about it a lot. And I thought they did an outstanding job of not giving up those big plays, but really creating pressure on 3rd downs and in the red zone is where they made their mark. Offensively, you talk about complementary football. Miller Moss was unbelievable in the biggest moments that he needed to be. Receivers stepping up, run game stepping up. And I thought what Yogi said about where you see this USC team now, they were on the outside because there were so many questions about what they could do on the defensive side, really have to take your hat off to Dan Lynn and what adjustments he's made with this defense, because if they can play like this becomes a very difficult team to stop. And let's go back offensively really quick, because I think one of the things that Lincoln Riley had been talking about all offseason was how this offense, how he could call the offense a little bit differently than he's been able to call it in previous years, because he had a quarterback that kind of thought like him, that didn't necessarily going to get outside the pocket and be so creative and do things on his own. Playing inside the system is a huge thing, and I'm looking forward to seeing this offense.
And as Yogi was talking about, when you have those receivers, like, man, stand in there and get the ball to them, because they're going to catch it. I mean, the catch by Kyron Hudson's going to be one of the best catches maybe of the season, the leaping one-handed grab early on in the game. But we're talking about 12 passes of 15 yards or longer for Miller Moss. That was the most of any power conference quarterback in week one. So the offense is dynamic. Woody Marks is a really good piece for them, a transfer from Mississippi State. The line played pretty well. It just felt like all of that came together, and that was a question mark coming into the year, that offensive line. But to me, I can't get over the defense. I can't get over how much better it was than a year ago. And I get that LSU doesn't have Jaden Daniels. They had a lot of guys
They've
back.
got weapons.
They got a lot of guys back from last year. It was the highest scoring offense in the country. USC held them to 20 points and set the tone early with that goal line stand. Like, to me, the goal line stand said, hey, we are here. We're here to play. I thought they tackled so much better than in the games that I watched a year ago. Obviously, Yogi watched them more than we did because he was working for the Pac-12 networks, but I made a point to watch them quite a bit last year, and they couldn't tackle at all. They were very solid in that aspect of the game. Hats off to Danton Lynn, Yogi, because to turn around a defense that quickly, and I know they made a few personnel moves and brought in some guys in the portal who helped them, but it seemed to me that a lot of that was just they were fundamentally so much better than they were a year ago. Some of the same players who we saw making mistakes last season.
Yeah, you look at Mason Cobb, Eric Gentry, two of their better games of their careers in their time, whether it's 2 or 1 season with the USC Trojans. I'll go back to that goal line stand, because I learned this way back in the day from former USC coach Pete Carroll. To the really great teams, the elite teams, there's a difference between hoping things go well and knowing and trusting that they will go well. And as I was watching that game unfold and that drive specifically, I'm saying, okay, if they don't get a stop here, as those players go to the sideline, many of whom were on that defense a year ago, are they saying, here we go again?
Yep.
Because there were some chunk plays that LSU was picking up early on in the ball game, and they get that stop. And to me, you watch that energy collectively coming to the sideline, and they're probably saying, yeah, this is the new look us. And they all said it post-game. You read any quote or watch any of the media they did, they wanted to make an emphasis from the end of last season, when all the changes were made to the staff, to now, that the defense could physically stop the run. And that's what they did. And of course, it's a collective effort, but that moment to me, we're going to talk to the entire staff this week in advance of our game on the Big Ten Network against Utah State. Like, was that moment that big? Because watching it and watching their body language and I thought their confidence grow as the game went on, as they adjusted. That to me stood out to be maybe not as big as the Kyron Hudson catch, but defensively, one of the biggest moments.
Yeah, I think it will be able to point back to this game, because this LSU offense is going to put up some big numbers this year. This is a talented group, although they had a first-time starter who I thought made some unbelievable throws in this game.
Yeah.
But this defense and this team was tested early. Some other teams are going to get some tests in the coming week, but we know who USC is right now. And I think we can all be pretty confident that they're going to continue to get better on the defensive side as the year goes on.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, again, I get it. Jaden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy. He was great. Nussmeier was incredible. I mean, he was on time and on target, and USC still held them to 20 points. Really, really impressive. As for the Big Ten's highest-ranked team, the Ohio State Buckeyes, they started a bit slowly, but they did pour it on against Akron, 52-6. Will Howard, K-State transfer, solid in his debut, threw for 228 yards and 3 TDs, 2 to the outstanding freshman Jeremiah Smith, as the Bucs got their 25th straight season-opening win. That is the longest streak in the nation. It's hard to read too much into this, Yogi. They have a really cushy early season schedule. I think it's going to be a while before we really know how good the Buckeyes are. But what did you read into this performance?
It's the first game I watched after our game in Oregon. I was like, all right, let me go back and watch what happened. Because you're just seeing the score and you're wondering when I think it's 17-3 at half, like, well, what is going on in this ball game? You know, you imagine they just be up by 30, kind of like how we felt in Eugene to a degree with the talent on the rosters. And you see the early drop by the freshman receiver Smith, as you referenced earlier. To me, I saw them on third down, just some miscommunication. And also, these teams at the top are always going to get the best. And Joe Moorhead, we all know him from his time at Penn State or his time at Oregon or as a head coach at Mississippi State. They were going to dial up some good plays. I thought they caught Ohio State aggressively a few times, whether there's a screen or a tunnel screen, something along that line, that nature. But overall, I think they played a solid game. I don't think it was as efficient as it needs to be. And I'd imagine that was the first thing they talked about. I didn't see a team, though, that played tight. And when it got close, when it was close, that's the first thing I go to with these elite teams is, are they playing loose? Are they playing to meet others' expectations? And I thought that once the game settled in, you watch Will Howard deal, you watch this offensive line find their way. Defensively, of course, they are special. So not worried about them, but it wasn't as clean as anticipated. And I think it's fair and worthy of a discussion around some of the teams at the top, as there's some juggling if we wanted to do a power rankings of sort.
I think one of the things when we see Ohio State, and we've seen this over the last couple of years, they will start a little slow sometimes,
yeah.
and we saw that. And when you think about having a new quarterback, when you think about how they've reshuffled the offensive line, and I think this is a team that went out and ultimately did exactly what they needed to do. Yes, it took a little bit of time for them to settle in, but they were able to do that. And when they did, the offense opened up. Defensively, they went out and started to make the plays that we're going to be accustomed to them making on a regular basis this season. So I don't really have the concern for Ohio State at all. Unlike USC, who made a statement, I think Ohio State's statement comes down the line, and we'll be able to see this team get better as well.
And I thought the defense, I agree with Yogi. I mean, obviously there were a couple plays that they'd like to have back, but I mean, you have 5 sacks, you have 10 tackles for loss, you're forcing turnovers. That part of it to me was roughly what I expected, maybe absent a couple of plays. I think it was just the offense, a couple decisions that Howard made.
We're going to see
trying to
that.
throw the ball when he was going down and ended up throwing it laterally. And kind of like, what are you doing? But again, there's so much talent on this team, you know, both sides of the ball, that if he figures it out, settles down, I think they'll be not just fine. I think they'll be great.
And I think this is going to be a team that's going to rely upon what's going to happen up front, being able to run the ball with that talented backfield that they have. Yeah, the quarterbacks are going to come up, or Will Howard's going to come up and start to make the plays he needs to. But I think everyone needs to settle in, and he's got to settle in. It's a big deal to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State. It's just not about what you do on the field. That's all the other things that go on around that you have to learn to get accustomed to as well.
Yeah, watching them on offense, I'll say, like, I was never not confident. I was never like, oh, I don't know if they're going to be able to move the ball here. It was just kind of like Oregon. Like, they moved the ball up and down the field. It was just some inconsistencies, whether it was a decision, whether it was an errant throw, whether it was a drop ball, whether it was one guy in the offensive front. That was it. And I think that, to me, makes me feel really good, Howard, to your point, about this team moving forward. Some small things, some kinks that everybody is going to have to deal with early on. The reality for them, though, is it's much different than everybody else. I mean, it's kind of like the NFL, you know, and you look at their early schedule, you know, they've got to play well. We know that upsets can happen, but I don't anticipate them having many issues. Then they get a bye. I mean, the schedule just plays out for them to really find their rhythm over the first month of the season.
I would agree, especially a quarterback. You're in transition there. Let him get his feet wet against opponents that you really should dominate. That starts with Western Michigan as the next game, a game you can see here on the Big Ten Network this weekend. Third-ranked Oregon, a little underwhelming in its first game as a Big Ten member. Ducks with a much closer than expected 10-point win over Idaho. Dylan Gabriel, solid first start as a Duck, 41 of 49, 380 yards, 2 scores. Those 380 passing yards, by the way, the most ever for an Oregon quarterback in his debut. And frankly, they kind of needed him to chuck it all over the place because the offensive line struggled. The run game wasn't great. They didn't protect particularly well. Yogi, you were there, so we'll give you the first word here. What did you make of Oregon's performance, a performance that Dan Lanning very clearly wasn't thrilled with based on his post-game comments?
No, he wasn't. I think, of course, Dylan Gabriel gets a game ball. I think the fans got a game ball because the atmosphere was phenomenal. Having called so many openers there in the past, this one was by far different than any of the others, and the game led to that, right? The fans had to meet the moment. I think the offensive line, as you referenced, was the question. It's been the question throughout training camp. Center, guard, who is it going to be? We know that they have talent across the board. We know they can run the ball. The thing that stood out to me even more than that, though, was the lack of explosive plays.
Yeah.
Idaho, give them credit. Nice job tackling. They weren't missing a lot of guys in space, but we're accustomed to seeing Oregon have 8, 9, 10 explosive plays in games like this. And whether they missed a deep ball on a throw, they couldn't break a run, little things like that stood out to me. I think overall for them, it's probably great, right? Every time this team goes in and on Sunday to watch the film, Dan Lanning has a phrase, which we could all use in our homes too. He tells the players, it's time to go to the doctor. You got to take the medicine. And sometimes the medicine doesn't taste very good. And I'd imagine that the meeting yesterday and the meetings today don't taste great for that offensive front and that offense in particular in terms of generating explosive plays. Were they efficient? Dramatically. Do they have playmakers? Of course, all over the field. Did some show up and rise up? Of course they did. But it wasn't up to the standard. And they're going to have to play extremely well this weekend because they got a Boise State coming in that is hungry, that is not going to be afraid of Autzen Stadium, that's going to want to run the football. That's a different story because the Oregon defense is awesome. But the offensive line has to find a way to protect, and they got to find a way to get explosive plays.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy on the explosive plays. But they had 54 plays last year of 25 yards or longer, so that's roughly 4 per game. They had none in this game. And again, Idaho's a really good FCS team, but it's an FCS team, and you have 0 explosive plays with all that talent that surrounds Dylan Gabriel.
Well, they didn't want to give up the big play. That was a big part of it. And you talk about the offensive line not living up to where they need to play and where they're going to be expected to play as the season goes on. This was a D-line that really got a lot of penetration and was causing some problems up front. So really stifling the run game in that respect. This is something that has to be shorn up. But I tell you one thing that ends up happening. Yeah, you win this game. And Yogi, you talked about taking the medicine. Reverend, I don't know if you remember cod liver oil. It was awful. It was something along the lines.
You're aging us a little bit.
Yes, we are.
I don't think people are
they
taking
probably don't
cod
even
liver oil
sell that anymore.
Yeah.
That stuff was awful. But that's probably what it's like. But there's an opportunity that, yes, we're still where we want to be as a program, what we need to go out and do, but we have to play so much better if we are expected to meet the goals that we set in the beginning of the year.
Yogi, let me ask you this. Help us understand Dan Lanning a little bit, because you've been around him now the last couple of years. For us, this is new. This is the first time that we've been around this Oregon program. How does he handle moments like this, and what do you think he'll do to get Oregon to where their fans, and I think where the national media and everyone who's watching this year expects them to be based on that number 3 preseason ranking?
Yeah, well, look, he's going to be really direct, and his team loves that. I mean, you look at, we talk about, again, I reference how many times I'm going to say their DNA traits. Here we go. Second week in a row. Connection, growth, toughness, and sacrifice. And the toughness is a part of it where he's just going to tell the guys, hey, look, it wasn't good enough up front. Right? I'm sure he referenced that right after the game in the locker room. And on the same side, the defensive front was tough enough. I mean, I feel as confident about this team. Like I referenced Ohio State earlier, right? You never were worried about them. I felt the same way calling this game. I never felt like Idaho was going to win the ball game. The defense was awesome. The defensive line was collapsing the pocket. They have playmakers defensively that are physical, long, talented, with range, all over that side of the ball. And offensively, it's not like they weren't moving the ball, right? It's a sack caused fumble right before the half. They should be up 28-zip at the half. They just have to shore up a couple things. And that's the greatest part of this game, because it could be Idaho, it could be Ohio State in Autzen. It won't matter, but it's an 11-person game. And Idaho played that way. They had less than 5 missed tackles on the night, guys. I mean, they played really efficient football in that regard. So for the Ducks, I think they have to match that, because they're going to face teams that are going to say, we are going to dare you to check it down. Check it down. I mean, how many times did Dylan Gabriel check the ball down? At least 10 out of those completions that you just showed on the big screen there, man. So that's what I think is going to be the book against the Oregon offense, because it is so explosive. But when they get their shot on a double move, Evan Stewart on a deep post drop, that's where they've got to make those plays and make you pay. And if not, just be boring, take the easy completion, and keep moving the ball down the field. But those are long drives. I mean, Oregon, I'm not used to 8, 9-minute drives. And that's what this game was, because of the style in which Idaho played. Boise State's going to play that style of defense. Everybody who has to face this team is going to take a page out of what the Vandals did on Saturday night, and that's okay. Because Dylan Gabriel can be surgical and deal, and he's going to have to continue to do that.
And quite frankly, that's not a bad game plan at all. Yes, you're not going to be scoring the points that we expect them to score, but if you want to play a game like this, they've proven that they're going to go out and take exactly what the defense gives you. So outside of the turnovers, I'm not concerned about this team either, because much like Ohio State, they just have to find that rhythm, have to find out where they are, and having to play a little bit differently sometimes, where you have to check it down and take what they're giving you, make those plays. I think they'll shore up the offensive line as the season continues to progress, and they'll be just fine.
But I think to Yogi's point, and we'll move on here in a second, for Oregon, the schedule is much tougher than Ohio State's here, right? Boise State's going to be fired up. They get Oregon State the week after that. We know there's going to be a little bit of animosity in that game.
A little bit.
Yeah, just a smidge. So they got to get it right here over the next couple weeks. Oregon may have been a tad underwhelming. Penn State was not. They were tremendous. Went on the road to West Virginia, looking far more explosive in their first game under new offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki. Drew Aller averaged nearly 20 yards per completion. He was about 11 last season. 3 TD passes. Nittany Lions went into a hostile environment at Morgantown, came away with a 34-12 win. This was a very fashionable upset pick, Yogi. I heard a ton of people saying they thought that West Virginia would win this game. And not only did they not win this game, they never really had much of a chance to win it. Ton of credit to Penn State, who played well. And this did look like a different offense.
Yeah, and well, after the first 2 drives, when Penn State really stifled them on late downs, you're thinking, okay, West Virginia took their shot. And I think for Penn State offensively, they just kept leaning on them. And I think that's what the really special teams do, especially on the road. Can you lean on it in the run game? Then can you create explosives? That's what they did. 5 explosive plays in this ball game. We saw a couple in the air from Drew Aller. And it's just fun to watch his confidence be at its peak. And look, every quarterback who's highly ranked at any of these schools that we're going to be talking about all year long, the fan base is going to expect things that are unrealistic. They're going to expect you to be Trevor Lawrence as a true freshman to win a natty. Not going to happen. He met adversity last year. He struggled in huge games last year. I think he's come out the other side, right? We all talked to him at training camp about that specifically. I thought in a tough environment, he didn't flinch. He was smiling. He was having a blast in a kind of a unique game with the delay. And just fired up for him in this offense because they quieted a lot of the noise around them, and rightfully so.
And a lot of that noise was about whether he could go out and beat big-time teams. Now, the number wasn't next to West Virginia, but the hostile environment, without a doubt, is what you get when you go into Morgantown. And for him to be able to answer that and play the way he did, and really for the entire offense to play like that, is what you really want to see early in games. And you go to the other side, Tom Allen taking over on the defensive side. This is still the same defense. Yes, some names have changed, but they're still going to be aggressive. They're still going to be tough at the point of attack, and they're going to know how to take the football away. So this is a Penn State team that's playing right where they need to. I think they may be a little ahead of some of our expectations because we saw some of those big plays that we haven't seen in the last couple of years, not only from the run game, but definitely from the pass game. And Drew being comfortable at this position is what they're going to need for them to take that next step.
And I think the numbers can give you a ton of perspective here because we're talking about, well, they were explosive. I mean, they had 8 plays all of last year that went for 40 yards or longer. 8, and 6 of them, by the way, came in the final couple games. They had 2, like in the first 10 games of the year. They had 4 in this game. So they had half the number of 40-yard or longer plays in one game against one of the better teams that they will face, certainly the best team they'll face out of conference this year. Half of the number in one game as they had all of last season. So the story for Penn State was the offense. For Michigan, the story was the defense. Michigan held Fresno State under 250 yards, forced 2 turnovers, which both led to touchdowns. Will Johnson sealing the win late, an 86-yard pick six. It was a 16-10 game with 6 minutes left before the Wolverines scored the game's final 14 points. 16th straight win overall for the defending national champs. Yogi, the defense was great in Sharon Moore's debut, and I think based on what we saw when we were there at camp, I don't think this surprises any of the three of us. I know I was surprised that Davis Warren got the start at quarterback. I really came out of camp feeling like it would probably be Alex Orji. It sounds like Warren pulled away in the final week of camp. the offense was shaky. I think it's fair to say there just wasn't a whole lot there. So let's start with the offensive performance. What did you take from what you saw from Davis Warren? Alex Orji was in there a little bit. Donovan Edwards was not a huge part of the run game. It was a lot more Khalil Mullings. What do you make of Michigan offensively?
Well, I think shaky's a fair word. Right now, if I was at the press conference in Ann Arbor, I'd ask Sharon Moore, what matters most as you're making the decision at quarterback? Because watching Alex Orji and Davis Warren compete, look, it was one day that we got to go there for training camp, but Howard, you and I remember being in the indoor and just watching them deal. They were throwing on air, but through every type of route on the route tree. And as you're watching Davis Warren throw, you're saying, all right, if you want to play on rhythm, you want to play on schedule, drop, climb the pocket, deal, he was kind of the guy in that regard. You saw the athleticism, also the throwing capability of Alex Orji. But me, as I was watching this game unfold, I'm saying, okay, why do they go with Warren? They clearly are confident. They addressed it after the game, just in situational football, how we kind of really separated in the last week of training camp upwards towards game preparation for this one. But where I thought they struggled was when he normally would be on rhythm, he's thrown off his back foot at times. Right? They didn't have a lot of explosive plays. I think they had 2 explosive plays the whole game. Their longest play was 21 yards. And they had opportunities for balls down the field. But when you're throwing off your back foot, you're not going to be accurate. And we saw a couple balls sail on Davis Warren. And he is a tremendously accurate passer. Of course, greatest story you could argue in week 1 of college football, maybe all season, in terms of walking on and leading the defending champions out of the tunnel in the home opener. I mean, it's just phenomenal. But they have to be more efficient in the passing game. I'm so curious to see what happens because they are not facing a team like that some other teams in this conference are facing in week 2. They got Texas coming into town, and they got to be able to deal.
It is an amazing story. I mean, on top of being a walk-on, he's a walk-on largely because he had leukemia and had to battle through that. I mean, it is an incredible story, and hats off to Davis Warren, who clearly is he's a big-time quarterback. And the fact that we sit here and say, well, maybe we're a little surprised it wasn't Alex Orji. It's not about Davis Warren as much as it is about just kind of the whole thing looked a little stagnant. To Yogi's point, I want to point out one thing.
Shoot.
They won the national championship last year. They had 3 games with less than 300 yards of total offense, and they had less than 300 yards in this game. So we kind of forget, right? When you have a team that won the national championship, you think, well, they were dominant and they were rolling through everyone. That wasn't necessarily the case. It was about defense a year ago. So I don't think you push the panic button. I'm not saying they have the wrong quarterback. I'm just saying that this was not an overwhelming offense, and perhaps that's to be expected because they lost a ton to the NFL, 8 draft picks. They lost their head coach. They lost a first-round quarterback. But what did you take from it all, Howard?
I think it goes back to Yogi's point. It depends upon what type of offense you ultimately want to run. And I thought the entire offseason that the way Alex Orji would not win this job would be if he was turning the football over in practice. And I'm not saying that he did, but that would be the reason for him not to start. Warren could have just outplayed him. As they've talked about, he's outplayed him and separated himself during game week. But I think they're going to need more moving forward. They're going to have to be able to get more out of the run game to really be able to make the run that they think they can make. And that comes down to what's going to happen at the offensive line. They've got to be able to get Donovan Edwards going, not only in the run game, but also coming out of the backfield. So it'll be interesting to hear the comments from the press conference this week from Coach Moore and just to see what this team ultimately looks like, because this is a hefty test that they've got this week with a team that's going to be able to put up some points, and they're going to need to move the ball.
Yogi, give you the last word on Michigan. Obviously, we'll talk about them a ton this week with Texas looming.
Okay, 2 quick things. One, I got to imagine there's going to be a big package for Alex Orji. Didn't play a ton in the first game of the season against Texas. I think you got to have him on the field in some regard in the run game. And then 2, this defense was different than any defense I watched on film in advance of this show today, man. The physicality, the explosive nature, Quinn Ewers and company. This is going to be an epic battle come Saturday. You're going to talk about it all week. But that stood out as like, whoa, they were in 6th gear. A lot of other good defenses were in 5th on Saturday.
We're still talking about a team that's won 16 straight games. So we don't want to sit here and sound the alarm. And you knew they were going to be in transition to a certain extent. And I think that's what we saw. But again, as you guys mentioned, there's just not a lot of margin for error when you're playing a team as good as Texas. After a 6-point first half that had a more of the same feel, Iowa exploded for 34 points after the break against Illinois State. Cade McNamara going 13 of 14 in the final 2 quarters with 3 TD passes, 2 of them to true freshman Reese Vanderzee, as the Hawks won it 40-0. Just the 5th time this century they have scored 40 or more points. Now, I do think it's fair to point out that one of the 5 times was last year against Western Michigan. So I don't have the transcript from Big Ten today on that Monday, but perhaps we went crazy on that Monday and said, oh, Iowa's turned the corner. They figured it out. They went over 40 points. So I don't want to just go crazy here, Yogi. But man, that second half was dramatically better and dramatically different than the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of what we've seen from Iowa these past few years.
Well, the incredible research team by Harold Shelton and crew, when I got the note that they had 3 receiving touchdowns on Saturday, and last year they had 3 all season, I said to myself, you've got to be kidding me. Is this a typo, bro?
The year before was 2. So, the year before they had 2 touchdowns from wide
I'm an
receivers.
Offensive guy.
Yes, it's crazy.
I can't even understand that. That should be in a half, right? But it's reality. So, yes, we know who the opponent is, and we know that the opponent's going to get much more challenging. We know what the first half was. If not, you ask Coach DiNardo what the first half was like. But to the point of what Cade McNamara did in the second half is that they found their flow. They found their rhythm in this game, especially on offense. And I can only imagine playing offense at Iowa and struggling the way they have over the last couple of years. The confidence you must feel. It didn't matter if you were playing the Bears back in the day, you were playing Illinois State. You just wanted to score. You wanted to find some explosive plays. They did that. So, yes, they have to stack days. They have to do it every week. But the fact that they did, that they took shots, it's exciting. It's exciting for Iowa fans. We know what this defense is. If they want to make real noise in this new-look league, they're going to have to score. So happy to watch Cade McNamara finally deal a little bit. And, again, always talk about quarterbacks. You drop your shoulders. Really be confident in that regard. I thought we saw that in the second half.
Caleb Johnson really stepped in the second half, too. Didn't play in the first, started to get his carries in the second, going 11 carries for, I believe, 119. So that, I think, helped open up some things for them offensively, that run game. But they definitely have to get to that point where they can consistently run the football. You go back to, I think, all year what Kirk Ferentz has been saying all offseason when he talked about Cade. He wanted to see it and needed to see him in game reps. Really not 7-on-7. Yeah, quarterbacks can look great in 7-on-7. He needed to see him in game reps, meaning scrimmages, and now he has this game under his belt. And you saw him be more comfortable in the second half of this game, which is significant because I think building his confidence and keeping him in that mold, it would be huge for him.
Huge game coming up this week, Iowa State. There's some really interesting games. Yeah. It's always a heated rivalry. This is going to be a huge step up in terms of the level of competition, and we will get a nice gauge as to where the Hawkeyes are. They had the lowest scoring offense in the Power 5 last year. Nebraska was also in the bottom 5 in that category. They got the nation's top QB recruit, Dylan Raiola, and they too put up 40. They topped UTEP 40-7. Raiola throwing for 238 yards, 2 TDs in his first college start. Did not throw a pick. There's 284 passing yards overall for the Huskers, 85 more than in any game last season. Again, I get it. It was UTEP, but man, Yogi, that was fun to watch.
Yeah, it was, and it's really hard to play quarterback, especially as a freshman. Imagine the pressure that he has to deal with. And he's got to give the staff a ton of credit. Glenn Thomas, the quarterback coach, Matt Rule referenced he and the OC after the game in his post-game remarks. And he should, because to get a quarterback to prepare for a moment like this and be able to play, I thought, with confidence in the way he did is what stood out to me. I mean, he was making throws that a lot of freshmen don't make and really attempting a lot. Now, some were into double coverage, right? Some you're going to want to have back, but he's able to check the ball down when he's getting out of the pocket. He checked a couple plays at the line of scrimmage. Life will get dramatically more challenging for him, especially this weekend against the Colorado defense that I think will change their front and their look throughout the majority of this ball game and test his eyes. But I have a feeling that this quarterback just kind of found his rhythm a little bit. 7-7 early, you're wondering what's going on. They continue to cut it loose. They found ways to create explosive plays, especially in the second half, that I thought was a good sign for this offense. I'm not ready to give him a huge grade, but I think in his first game, you got to be excited. And I know they are in Lincoln, Nebraska, because of not only him signing, but the way that he performed on Saturday.
And they should be. I mean, he's a young quarterback, and the sky is the limit for him, so he's going to continue to get better. On the other side with Tony White, I think this defense continues to show why he's such an outstanding defensive coordinator, being able to put the players in the right position. 8 straight games holding their opponent under 24 points is going to be huge. They're going to need to be able to have that type of consistency when they step up in competition this week against Colorado. But they are doing exactly what we've expected them to do and come to expect out of this Nebraska football team, being able to take the football away and being able to slow teams down offensively.
It's a huge measuring stick game against Colorado, especially with what happened last year, the nature of that rivalry, the history of how heated it's been through the years. It just feels like, to feel truly validated, Nebraska has to win that game.
Brever, I'm going to be an armchair defensive coordinator.
Yes.
Don't let them get outside the pocket. Keep the quarterback in the pocket.
Shedeur can move a little bit.
You will have success because you're not going to be able to keep up with those wide receivers down the field.
Through both of those teams, starting with the Huskies.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that stood out to me was the efficiency on both sides of the ball. Right? Jed Fish gave Steve Belichick the game ball afterwards. A lot of times defensive coordinators struggle when they come down to college. No struggle there. Offensively, well, Rodgers was really efficient. The running game, as you referenced, I think they have a lot of playmakers on the outside. And I think this team, after watching a bunch in camp in week 1, I think they're top half of the Big Ten. And I think they're only going to improve all year long. When it comes to the Bruins, number one, kind of like Jed Fish, like congrats on your first win with your school. But for Deshaun Foster, congrats on your first win ever as a head coach. It wasn't pretty. The first half wasn't anything that the Bruins expected, but they navigated the adversity at halftime. They navigated the environment because it's just unique there when you play at Hawaii, as you referenced. And then they went and got a win. And I thought for Ethan Garbers, this is a guy coming off one of his best games in his bowl game. He struggled in the first half mightily, trying to do a little too much in this pro-style offense. I thought he settled down after watching the tape, was able to deal to guys like Rico Flores. And now, most importantly for the Bruins, they get a bye because there's a lot they have to look at, whether it's 9 guys on the field on special teams, some of the stuff around the management of the game. So I look forward to them taking a breather, and then here we go with their first Big Ten game in 2 weeks against Indiana at the Rose Bowl.
And then they play LSU, and then they play Oregon. So, yeah, they need this week. It was not a great performance, but to your point, you get a win, you get to shake off that travel rust a little bit, figure some things out before they return to the field against the Hoosiers. Maryland has a conference game this week. They will host Michigan State. They looked more than ready in the opener, routed UConn 50-7. It was the Terps' 13th straight non-conference win, including bowls. Only Georgia has a longer streak nationally. They rolled up 629 yards of total offense. Purdue's Hudson Card may have turned in the best individual performance in the conference in week 1. The Boilermaker QB went 24 of 25 through the air in a 49-0 rout of Indiana State. That tied the NCAA record for the highest completion percentage ever for a quarterback with at least 20 attempts in a game. Georgia's Grayson Lambert put up the same numbers 9 years ago. I get it. You consider the opposition, but Howard, that was really encouraging. So let's run through those two teams. Start with Purdue. Interested in your thoughts there. Thoughts on Maryland as well.
Well, I think it starts with Hudson Card and what he's able to do. Carr can make all the throws. And as we talked with him this offseason, the confidence just oozed out of him. He was really excited to be back in this offense for the second time, really had a great understanding on what he needed to do. You look at the defensive side, they still have some players that they're playing without. So this is a team in Purdue that's going to continue to get better, but seeing what they did on the offensive side really is encouraging. That's one of the things that I think is important. You go over to Maryland, and Billy Edwards found himself in a quarterback battle this offseason and won that battle. This is a guy that's coming off a bowl game, really had success there, and now to come out and have this type of performance, they ran the ball well, which was also important for them. And this is another one of those teams that plays outstanding defense. But when you talk about two quarterbacks that were coming in, and we talked about this at the beginning of the show, these quarterbacks have an opportunity to change the trajectory of what their teams can ultimately get to if they continue to play well. And yes, I know it's only week 1, But building that confidence and playing with this type of ability, I think, gives them the opportunity to reach their goals.
And give Billy Edwards a ton of credit, too, because they go out, they get a Power 5 QB who has started games in MJ Morris. I think a lot of guys would say, okay, clearly I'm not the guy, I need to move on. Yeah. Billy Edwards stayed. He fought for the job. He
Miller and Moss, huh?
Yeah, similar, right? Guys who stuck around. And, give credit to Nussmeier at LSU, too. Guys who stick around and say, hey, I'll wait my turn, and then when the opportunity comes, I'm going to seize it. And that's exactly what Billy Edwards did. Both those teams, huge tests coming up this week. Purdue gets a bye, and then they play Notre Dame. So their next game is in 2 weeks. But then Maryland, as we said, they get Michigan State. So, again, you're going to learn a lot here in the next game for both those teams. Northwestern taking down Miami of Ohio 13-6. Transfer QB Mike Wright got the start, played reasonably well, completed 60% of his passes, also ran for the lone TD of the game, was, in fact, the Cats' leading rusher. The defense for Northwestern turned in 4 sacks and 2 picks. Indiana, comfortable win in Kurt Cignetti's debut, 31-7 over Florida International. It's the Hoosiers' largest margin of victory in a season opener in 11 years. They went over 400 yards of total offense for just the 6th time in the last 35 games. So that a positive sign from what has been a stagnant Hoosiers offense. As we wrap things up here, Howard, couple of encouraging performances there. Let's start with Indiana.
Well, I think when you think about Indiana, I think they did an outstanding job from a defensive standpoint as they continue to build the confidence on that side of the football, taking it away, being able to run the ball offensively is huge for them. You look at Northwestern, really like what Wright did at the quarterback position. You want the completions to be higher, but his ability to create outside of the pocket is something that will help this offense really open up.
I think it was pretty clear when we were there that Mike Wright was the guy, just his ability to run the football. And it was interesting, there was not a whole lot of designed QB run, but when there was, it was very effective. You wonder whether Zach Lujan will work more of that in. They're going to have a tough test against Manny Diaz and company. We know what a good DC he is when they take on Duke this week. And that will also be at Martin Stadium right there on the lake. Yogi, what did you think of the atmosphere there at Northwestern and the setting in their temporary home?
Well, I want to thank you and your family for storing my stand-up paddleboard for the rest of the season. Because every time I come to Chicago now with Guy Haberman and Rhett Lewis, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. There we go, man. It was awesome. Can't wait to get there. I mean, look at that. Look at that. That is beautiful. It is majestic. I know it'll get a little bit chilly, but I just think it makes for a great story in such a unique and new year with all these new teams and changes in college football within the Big Ten that I want to go, man. I can't wait till we get a ball game there, brother.
Yeah, it is really something. I think it's just a great testament to thinking outside of the box in that athletic department because the options that they had otherwise for where they could play in the Chicagoland area honestly weren't great. They will have the 2 games at Wrigley Field later in the year, but that was not available early in the season. That is a tremendous solution. It's just perfect.
I know I need tickets for this weekend, Remy. Can you help me out?
I'd be able to help you out.
Help me out?
I know some people who know some people.
All right.
Yeah.